So trigger warning viewers, welcome to Mark Latham's Outsiders, Australia's most politically incorrect news and current affairs forum. We've got a whole new format here for promotion of free speech in Australia. It's wonderful to be on Facebook. It's wonderful to have the network reach. It's wonderful to present this free speech program free on what is the equivalent of TV. I hope you love our new studio. We've got a very special guest to my right, none other than Donald Trump, the American president. And I want all the leftist snowflakes out there to know that Donald Trump is here for the reason of sending you crazy. Trump derangement syndrome, the mere sight of a Donald Trump cutout cardboard replica will send you berserk. So the president's here for that purpose, and most importantly I'm joined by very important and great guests on Mark Latham's Outsiders, live Facebook streaming for the first time, our very first program. Now at another place at another time I was there with Ross Cameron and Rowan Dean. They've got contract obligations elsewhere, but I've really upgraded tonight. Instead of those rough heads, those ugly buggers, it's more like Beauty and the Beast here. It's an absolute great pleasure on Mark Latham's Outsiders to welcome Miranda Devine from the Daily Telegraph. Thanks for joining us. Here. It's pretty good digs, isn't it?
It's fabulous. It's just like Times Square.
Yeah.
Do we tell everyone where we are?
No, well, we might just keep that as part of the program.
No,
we
it's
might
very
have
inner city.
We might have a viewers guessing competition and prize later on. And Bettina, Arndt, thanks for joining us. How have you been?
Terrific, yeah.
I think you're an underutilised voice and resource. You've done so much research about issues to do with domestic violence and gender. So it's a delight to have you here.
Thank you.
Because one of the purposes of the program really is to say we trust the Australian people with information. We've heard all this disturbing news in recent times, not just about my circumstances, but Ayaan Hirsi Ali and what's happened at Cooper's, people being drummed out of their jobs because they believe in God and they believe in traditional marriage. We've entered a new age of censorship in Australia, and on Mark Latham's Outsiders, the purpose of this forum really is to say, you're out there in the suburbs and regions of the nation, we trust you with information. The elites try and close down debate because they sneer at the suburbs and regions. They say, oh, those idiots out there, bigots out there, can't be trusted with information. So it's important, I think, to present all the facts. So many Australians say to me that, look, the nation is changing quickly, you've got political correctness, social engineering, cultural Marxism through all our institutions. Where's the discussion? Where's the information? How do we find out what's happening in these institutions? So to have Bettina and Miranda here tonight is fantastic. We'll provide the information. If you think we've got it wrong or you disagree, make your comments on Facebook. We're doing our best to research and give accurate material out. We're certainly not going to close down debate. Essentially, we trust you. We trust our viewers to make a judgment. People are intelligent, people are better informed than any other generation. Why can't they be trusted to make an assessment of what's going on in our country and understanding these changes? We don't support the changes, so we're pushing back against them in the name of free speech, meritocracy, bit of larrikinism thrown in. You know, you can have a joke about someone without, you know, the snowflakes forming a new grievance industry. That's what we believe here, and we're going to go through the issues that are pretty important. Now, right at the top of the list, I worry a lot about identity politics, the fact that it's segregationist, it's dividing Australians on the basis of race, gender and sexuality. We used to have an ethos, Martin Luther King said it best, don't judge people by how they look, skin colour and the like, judge them by their character, their work ethic. Now Miranda, you reported something that I think people are still shaking their heads about from Alexandria Park in the middle of Sydney, a distressing story of we have to say it these days because how the debate is framed, a white woman, an Australian woman, many generations Australian background, who went to a local playgroup just thinking join up, be part of the community. What did you find out and what did you report?
Well, this woman, Tara Coverdale, who's a mother of two, decided to put her 8-month-old in the pram and take her 4-year-old in tow and go to a 5-minute walk from her house, an inner-city Sydney community group. And it's a play group for mothers, children, you know, preschool children, and they get together. And it's a very normal thing that happens across Sydney and Australian suburbs. She turns up and walks inside. Her little 4-year-old goes racing off, sees his buddy, and she's looking around for her friends. And a woman comes up to her who works at this community centre and says to her, is this your first time here? And Tara says yes, and thinks, oh, that's nice that they're so attentive, that they've noticed that, you know, I've come here. And the woman says, can I ask you what your cultural background is? Now, Tara is blonde, she has freckles, both of her sons have bright red hair, So she's pretty clearly Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Celtic background. So she's a bit taken aback by that question, and she says, well, I'm Australian. And the woman says, well, I'm sorry you can't come here because this is a multicultural playgroup.
Well, I would have thought the whole purpose of multiculturalism, I work for Gough Whitlam, I've heard a lot about this on the labour side. The purpose of multiculturalism is for people to come together across cultures. That if you're white, brown, Asian, whatever your ethnic background might be, and your cultural interests, we all sort of mix together, get to know each other, trust, build social capital, build community. And I find
and mix with Australians and learn about the Australian culture and, assimilate into the Australian culture. That was the point. And I was just thinking, my mother, who was German, my parents were German, came to Australia, they just loved being Australian. My mother worked most of her life teaching migrants English, she would go door to door, knocking on doors to persuade the husbands to let the mums come out and attend her English classes. And she would just be turning in her grave at this stuff. The fact that we are not encouraging people who come newly to this country to assimilate, to adapt to Australian values, to understand
Bettina,
the language.
Worse than that, we are actually encouraging them to ghettoise themselves.
That's right.
This multicultural playgroup is all about that. Tara Coverdale actually argued, the manager then came up to her and, in the process of throwing her and her two red-headed sons out of this playgroup, said to her again, what's your cultural background? And then informed her that she was not welcome because it was only multicultural and it was for people who speak, mothers who speak a language other than English at home. And Tara pointed out that wouldn't she be a good person for these newly arrived migrants to meet? Because she has a lot of connections in the community. She speaks English. She's open-minded and tolerant. As she points out, that part of Sydney is a very progressive area, and she thought that everyone was tolerant of everyone. But unfortunately, if you are Anglo-Celtic, then you're not wanted in that multicultural playgroup.
It's a shocking thing to think in Australia you can be thrown out of a public facility, publicly funded facility, for being an Australian.
It's so divisive.
And it goes against the theory of multiculturalism that you won't build trust and people get to know each other, settle the new migrants into the community by segregating people. The left has gone down a pathway of segregation, which is contrary to what Gough Whitlam, Malcolm Fraser would have said about multiculturalism. It really is distressing. How did it end? Has the government done something about this?
Well, she was terribly upset and contacted me, and so I rang the New South Wales Education Minister because they actually fund this community centre, and also spoke to the Board of Anti-Discrimination Board of New South Wales. They said that on the face of it, it looked like it was actually a breach of the Anti-Discrimination Act. Ridiculous, you have to go down that path. And of course, the Education Department and the Minister decided that they would counsel the woman, the manager of this outfit, and tell her that all comers should come. So it ended well, but my point really is that the woman who manages that playgroup, manages that community centre, she's just a creature of her milieu.
Yeah.
That is what is going on all over the country. Multiculturalism is not something about unifying, about many cultures coming together as Australians. It's actually about cutting up and dividing people one from the other according to
It is. And of course it's not an isolated incident. The university system in Australia is going down the path of safe spaces. And the argument is that so-called minorities need to be kept safe from white people, white men in particular. So the whole tragedy of what happened at Queensland University of Technology under 18C, those students who were persecuted by the Human Rights Commission, started with a safe space. This has been sort of forgotten in the debate about those uni students in 18C. It all started because the university administrators allowed a safe space which said that Indigenous students could only be in the computer lab. And the white students came in and wanted to do their work. They weren't there causing any trouble, and they were tossed out because of the colour of their skin. They weren't deemed to be Indigenous. They were chucked out for being white. So whether it's a playgroup in inner Sydney or so-called safe spaces in our universities, and then you've got the theory of cultural appropriation, what this approach is doing is segregating Australians away from each other. It's a primitive, divisive ideology. Where does it end?
Well, and if you complain about it, like happened to those Queensland University of Technology students, one of them went on Facebook and said, sarcastically fighting segregation with segregation.
Yeah, and he was right.
And he was then hauled before the Human Rights Commission and the Federal Court. A 4-year ordeal then ensued. He was prosecuted under 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act and effectively persecuted for arguing, for criticising this terribly divisive policy.
You'd think we could be Australians, welcome new cultures, respect Indigenous culture and mix together and learn from each other and share common stories and bonds. The problem at Queensland University of Technology was, how can anyone say that was Indigenous reconciliation? The whole theory of reconciliation is white and black people get together and get to know each other and we have a more harmonious community. If you're kicked out of a computer lab for having white skin, you can't get to know the Indigenous students. They're isolated. It's anti-reconciliation. So this is a massive own goal by the leftist elites, to go down the path of segregation where ethnic groups don't mix and get to know each other and pick the best of their cultural characteristics. That's segregation. Indigenous reconciliation is set back because whites can't mix with blacks, black people on a university campus. I mean, you know, we're starting to resemble sort of reverse South Africa, aren't we? I mean, it's gone nuts.
It is apartheid.
It is. It's gone nuts. And it won't be long before someone surely will test the Racial Discrimination Act to say that these policies are so entrenched now that the madness of it needs to be tested at law. You know, I'm against lawfare as such, but this stuff has become so wacky and against our national interest that eventually a stand will have to be taken.
Well, the purpose of it, though, clearly is to tell, for instance, having the separate Indigenous computer lab, is to tell Indigenous people, or the separate multicultural so-called playgroup, is to say to them, white people are actually bad and you need a safe space away from them because they have too much power, they have too much white privilege, and you'll never be able to speak or get along or use the computer or have a successful life if you are forced into the same pond as white Australians.
Well, that's the other aspect of it. White is the new insult in Australian politics. Who would have thought that Labor senators like Dastiari would be running around, effing white men, effing white men. The Greens are using that language. It's all over Fairfax, the ABC, the Guardian.
And of course we've also absolutely backed away from the idea that people who come to Australia should learn English. Indigenous community, within the Indigenous community, it's in their interest to learn English if they're going to interact with the broader community. We've had this enormous push for bilingual education in Indigenous communities, which has actually set back the progress of many people in growing up in Indigenous communities now. You go into... I was talking to a young doctor working in a hospital in the outback, an outback town, you know, whereas the grandparents still can speak English. The younger generations don't speak any English at all. And that's what's happened as part of this. It's part of the same process of protecting their identity, protecting their community at the expense of interacting with the broader community to their detriment. Yeah. And yet we never even talk about that anymore.
No, it's a terrible thing. And your average Australian, I get so much feedback, people stopping me on the street saying, we've heard of these instances of anti-white racism, we've heard of these segregation policies, we've heard of censorship. What is happening to our country? And, you know, I'd implore all the politicians to start talking about this a lot more. You know, Miranda's done a great job as a journalist with Alexandria Park. We only heard about the safe space at Queensland University of Technology because of the 18C atrocity. We need so much more public debate about it. I know it's unfashionable to have free speech and debate about these things, but that's what Mark Latham's Outsiders is here to achieve. I want to say we really value the support of our viewers. This is exactly the sort of conversation we need to have in Australia. We're not here telling people how to think or how to live their lives. We're just trying to put the facts out there to air these matters that are of so much national concern. Another issue, Bettina, you need to be congratulated for the great work you've been doing in breaking the cone of censorship about a movie called The Red Pill. Can you give us the background?
Well, it's a fascinating story. The young feminist filmmaker in America went out to look at the rape culture on campus, which is something we should talk about one day, this beat up of this idea that uni kids are so at risk of rape. And she went to have a look at that and started talking to some of the men's rights organisations in America and ended up being fascinated by what they were telling her and ended up doing her whole movie.
So she went in as a left feminist with a certain worldview.
And thought they were going to be misogynist, violent, you know, dreadful men. and listened to what they were saying about the lives of boys and men in America at the moment, and ended up doing her whole program, her whole movie on that. All her funding was withdrawn. She was told it would be a career-ending move to look at men's rights, to look at... they had to do crowdfunding to get this movie made. Released around the world last October, Australia became the only country in the world to essentially ban viewings, the first viewings of this movie in Australia.
Who banned it? Who had the power to do that?
Palace Cinema was supposed to have the first screening. There was a petition, of course, Change.com petition from women who'd never even seen the movie. There were no copies available in Australia at that time, but they'd been told it was violent and misogynist and so on. They all, 1,000 or so, signed up to this initial petition, and Palace caved and refused to show it. And within, of course, a week, they had 12,000 people saying, "Why didn't you show this movie? We want to see it."
It's great advertising for it.
It was, that is true. But then other cinemas came on board wanting to show it. They got death threats. They tried to close down their businesses by flooding their website with adverse publicity. They had a screening in Brisbane where they had to have police escorts taking the audience from one place to another secret venue.
So the sort of intimidation campaign.
And even before I saw this movie, I thought, blow that. I'm going to get in there.
Good on
but
you.
why on earth should we allow these people to determine what we can see? It's just
the movie is fine.
And the movie,
there's nothing
misogynistic.
Yes, nothing misogynistic about it. It is pure and simple the journey of a feminist, a young feminist, looking to find fault in these these man groups and anti-feminist groups, and she ends up being sort of won over by them because their beefs are actually quite genuine. That they feel
they talk about issue after issue,
alienated from their children in domestic disputes.
But the suicide rate of men. I mean, how is it we have 6 out of 8 people who kill themselves every day?
That's an epidemic.
6 out of the 8 people who kill themselves every day in Australia are male. We worry a lot more about whales beaching themselves, on some beach in Australia than we do. What's happening to these Australian men? Why are they so at risk? And same in America, she looked at that. She looked at boys' education. Why are boys doing so badly? Why don't we care about that?
That's right. Year after year, you have girls outstripping boys in the HSC in their final leaving certificate, and that is celebrated. Whereas a few years ago, when the shoe was on the other foot, it was a great travesty and a disaster.
In the university sector, 40% of the graduates are male, 60% are women.
And there's still all these
that's a great stat for the
trying
women,
to get more and more women to get the top jobs in Australian universities.
Yeah, when you talk
gender... When are we going to worry about all those males dropping out?
When you talk gender inequality, there's a very strong argument to say in a lot of the stats it's men who are disadvantaged. In a former place, on a former panel, I was there with Dee Madigan, the dreadful left feminist, and I raised these issues about male disadvantage. She started laughing. Well, I've been. She's supposed to be a Labor person. I doubt that in my eyes, but I was horrified at the idea someone who says they're Labor could laugh at the idea of disadvantage. But this is what it's come to.
This is about grinding men into the dirt. I thought, and I would have always called myself a feminist, but I believe in equality between men and women, not taking women's advantage and promoting women to the point that men get left so far behind, which is what's happening here now.
Wow. So
they won't be laughing, and our daughters won't be laughing, and their daughters won't be laughing, because we'll reach a point which is similar to the situation in Black America, where there are so few well-educated males compared to the number of well-educated women, and most women want to marry someone who's their equal.
And also there's this new movement of men swearing off women, men withdrawing from women,
Which
young
you
men.
can hardly blame them.
Well, and so what do you do? I mean, what does a young girl do who wants to just have the usual, have a boyfriend, get married to a nice man, have children? That sort of fairy tale thing is now seen to be so old-fashioned and outre and politically incorrect.
I mean, the figures are already pretty grim. One of my jobs, my day job, is actually dating coaching, helping people find...
I was going to ask about that later on.
Partners.
Fascinating.
And I deal with all these women who are, usually professional women who come to me wanting to find partners and wanting to find, men who are their equivalent in some way, intelligent, educated men. And they are already really struggling. I mean, in every age group over 35, there are more single women than men. And if you look at the figures already in terms of education, there's twice as many single educated women in all those age groups.
I looked up the stats on long-term welfare dependency in Australia and found there was 100,000 extra men than women. You know, the left feminist arguments very often about them, women like Dee Madigan, who want to sort of look at the very top elite echelon of society. They want to look at the top 2% to get more parliamentary, corporate board positions, legal management, judges and the like. And there's an argument in that area. But if you're interested in equity, are you most worried about the top 2% or the very bottom cohort where you've got 100,000 extra highly disadvantaged welfare dependent men compared to women? So the Labor Party priorities
can't even find
are upside down. And ultimately left feminism is a very selfish doctrine. It's about women who are doing very well, are wealthy. People probably think I'm picking on Dee Madigan. Good, I am. If someone who runs an advertising agency got good resources and access to the media is thinking about herself, how can she get a better job, a parliamentarian, corporate executive? You know, it's just wrong to be that selfish in your perspective when the whole purpose of being so-called, they call themselves progressive, they're not, real progressive, compassionate values are to say, if I'm doing well, my job is to look down the social ladder and care for the people who are doing it tough.
But they don't represent women. I mean, they're not.
Oh, yeah, that's important.
They're so unrepresented. The women that you see who have got the loudest voices, who are in the chattering classes, who are part of the media class, they are so, their life experience and their daily routine is so different from the experience of normal women that you get a skewed idea of what women's lot really is and what women really think. And you saw that in the American election when, remember the big scandal about Trump when he was talked about grabbing pussies and so on. And the media consensus, particularly from women who specialise in talking about what women think, was that, this is the end of Trump. You know, Republican women will not wear this kind of distasteful behaviour. Well, 93% of Republican women voted for him, and 53% of white women voted for him. So it wasn't a turn-off at all. And women are not just some monolith. They are just people, and they have different views.
You're quite right about this idea that the elite, and particularly I see it, of course, as you would, Miranda, in the media. I remember once writing an article about women's decision to stay home with their infants. Very strong preference amongst Australian mothers to look after their own kids when they're really young. And I think it's a very laudable thing. And of course the families make enormous sacrifices for women to be out of the workforce during that period. I was talking to one of my editors about this, and I said, look, here's this data showing that how many women, are making this decision by choice. I don't know any women who behave like that. I mean, she just couldn't believe that what we all wanted, it was all about the lack of childcare, and that's why we went rushing back into the workforce.
No, I know. Well, you get sneering. Anne Summers, sort of the high priestess of this left feminist doctrine, has disparaged women staying at home as rearranging their linen cupboards. Annabelle Crabb has described herself as the escaping parent in the morning, to get out the door and go to work. She's got a small army of nannies to look after the kids, of course, because of affluence. But this sneering I've been the primary carer of my children for a decade. I say to any men viewing, if you want to do that to support your spouse, it's great, very rewarding, a wonderful, loving experience to look after your children, but don't expect the left feminists to give you any praise for it. Don't expect them to have anything other than, a narrow ideology and demonisation of any man, even someone who's doing the right thing. But the Hillary Clinton point is fascinating, because Clinton in the United States went down the ultimate path of identity politics. She said, vote for me because I'm a woman, vote for me if you're a black American, vote for me if you're a Latino. Meanwhile, if you're a white, male, unemployed person in the rust bucket states, restructured out of your jobs, heroin on the streets for your kids, Clinton, from the Democrats, supposed to look after needy people, had nothing to offer, nothing to say. And to their credit, those Americans, many of whom hadn't voted in big numbers for decades, went out and said, we're not putting up with this. You've got a policy there for every group except us. White, straight men, family men.
And she called them deplorables.
And
she was appalling to them. And I think women who were married to those deplorables, or the daughters of those deplorables, or the mothers, just felt so angry about that. So they voted for their men.
It's not just the men, it's the women who know and love those men and see what they're going through. And that's what we were talking about, the red pill and Cassie J. that's what she found too, that there is a group of people who are really up against it in America, men who are facing enormous disadvantage in a whole range of areas we've been talking about, in education, but also under family law. We're seeing more and more draconian laws that don't even give men their basic rights under the law, and that's applying here too. Anyway, she makes this whole movie around this, and no one in Australia got to see it very much late last year.
How do we see it? It sounds so important.
I'm terribly excited by this.
Great. Go Bettina.
We've got this great organisation called Fan Force, which is an organisation that enables people to host a viewing of any movie they like, really. But we're doing a whole series of movies, screenings of the Red Pill around Australia. So people in the local area can say, I want to see the Red Pill in, Maroochydore or Dubbo or whatever, and they just apply. The organisation approaches the movie theatre, they set it all up, you have a certain number of people you have to get in the door, and then it goes ahead.
Wow.
And we've got
democracy
screenings setting up, starting in Sydney and Melbourne.
That'll scare the left.
Well, I mean, it's a laydown, because the movie is out there now, and it's going to be shown.
Fantastic.
And people want to see it. And women are coming in droves, not just the men, because as Miranda said, it's the wives and the sisters and the fathers, the mothers of these men who and women know what's happening in the lives of men, and they're worried about it.
I find it so compelling that the filmmaker had a certain view of the world and then judged the evidence. How refreshing.
Yes.
Because the whole point of political correctness is to say, we don't want you to find out about this, so you won't learn, you can't judge evidence. It's irrational. It's almost the primitive idea in what's supposed to be the age of enlightenment, our society, that you can't judge evidence and make up your own mind. So Cassie J has reformulated her views based on evidence.
Absolutely.
And then the ultimate left repression is to say, well, hang on, she might have learned something, but people in Australia can't learn the same lessons.
Well, feminists are right to be worried, because the most damaging, violent thing in this movie are the feminists. There are extreme feminist demonstrators shown screeching outside lecture theatres where men and women are trying to talk about men's issues, setting off fire alarms, doing everything they possibly can to stop people being allowed to talk about men's issues. And that's what appalled Cassie J. And that's what appalls most people who see this movie.
And that's why they don't want you to see it.
No, absolutely right.
Well, hats off to you, Bettina, for fighting this fight. And
we want people to come to this movie. You have to wave the flag, people. I mean, it's a flag about people's right to choose what they want to see in this country.
Yeah, so you're watching Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'm Mark Latham, of course, joined by Miranda, Devine and Bettina Arndt. And the point we've just been discussing is so instructive. This is the kind of conversation you just don't hear in the mainstream media. You don't hear enough about the needs of men in these circumstances because of repression, because of censorship. So these are the discussions we want, and I've got a little announcement to make. I think it's a very significant announcement that Bettina will be providing more research and material on our Facebook page and our website. I think the issues about men are massively neglected and ignored in the Australian media. Bettina, you've been underutilised. Your voice should be heard. I'm glad you're here for our first program tonight, and we're going to be hearing a lot more from you about these issues, because I passionately believe anyone in need, doesn't matter their skin colour, doesn't matter the shape of their genitalia, doesn't matter their sexuality, who they're sleeping with, I don't care. If they've got real needs and challenges and trauma in their life, compassionate people need to raise these issues, and our politicians need to listen. So I think what you've done on this Red Pill is fantastic. It's an example of exactly the reason I've created Mark Latham's Outsiders, so that our Facebook viewers can watch. You're getting freedom of speech on Free TV Forum. You might also notice no advertisements, those annoying ads you get elsewhere. We haven't got any of that. You've just got us giving the information as best we can. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching us. And Bettina, we've also got some news that Miranda, myself and yourself, we're not just here on our program this evening. We're speaking at the men's conference on the Gold Coast, the 9th to the 11th of June. And it's an international conference. Again, you've been taking a lead in the Australian organisation. Can you tell us about it and some of the fantastic speakers?
Well, yes, this is very exciting, a big international conference. They've had a whole series of this, and this is the first time, of course, it's come to Australia.
Right.
And what is amazing is the number of really powerful speakers who are coming along. I was just listening to an Indian man talking about what they're doing in terms of men's rights in India, and how the propaganda around what's happening in India is so distorted. So he's going to be fascinating. But one of the really interesting things is the number of powerful women. And there's a number of women who've concluded that it's really hard for most men to speak out about these issues. And the changes are going to come from women really getting on board. And so Cassie J is coming. Mm-hmm. She's going to show her movie.
There'll be screenings.
On our Facebook, your Facebook page, there is where I showed a video of a woman called Karen Strawn, who's also coming. Mm-hmm. I mean, she's like an AK-47. She is such a good speaker, really on top of the facts, demolishes the arguments of anyone she chooses to take on. I want to see her take on Clementine Ford or some of our other noted feminists, and we're hoping to get some of these speakers down to Sydney so that we can have maybe get them onto some of our big programs. Maybe even the ABC would consider showing some of these.
I'm proposing.
Well, I'm working on Q&A. Don't hold your breath, but we'll see. But as I pointed out to them, they've done a whole series of Q&As based around women's conferences. So what is the argument of it ignoring this really important international men's conference?
Yeah, we'll be up there. We'll be doing videos and interviews for Mark Latham's Outsiders. So I'm very excited by it. I think it's a great development. Miranda, you'll be speaking?
I'll be speaking as well, yep. The three of us, the deplorables, will be there. So,
well, you give me some credibility, you see. If I was here with two men, we'd all be misogynists.
Yeah, that's
you and
true.
Bettina
because
deflect some of the nonsense talk.
But it's a genuine feeling that, especially I have two sons, and I don't want them to be growing up in an environment that is so hostile to men. And unfortunately, feminism has just become grievance feminism, anti-male feminism, and it's so destructive, not just to young men, but also to the young women who want those men eventually to be their partners and the fathers of their children.
And how do you think the average young Australian man is handling the current environment where, despite these statistics about disadvantage, you've just got a tidal wave of demonisation of the man in societies? The white straight man has become the ultimate statement of condemnation at Fairfax, ABC, the leftist media. It must be intimidating, I think, for a lot of young men to think, I'm working out at school, I'm going to go to uni, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to be a contributor. Almost to feel like you're not welcome as an individual in your own right. You're not welcome in society now to be treated as an equal. They must have a lot of feeling that I've done nothing wrong here, but why all this talk?
Well, I'm sure that is what contributes to this sort of global revolution that we've seen that started with Brexit, the anti-political correctness, anti-elites. That's all the feminist sort of gender wars are all part of that, and it's really about seizing power from the old regime, which is supposedly white male privilege, and giving it to these other people who I don't know why they think they're any more deserving of power, and this is so alienated the average person that they're now speaking the only way they can in democracies at the ballot box, and they are choosing people. They're choosing dangerous things. I mean, Brexit is a dangerous thing, but it's tearing up the old order. Same with Trump. They've chosen a vulgarian, really, a barbarian, precisely because he is there to rip up the old order. And I think people like these young men we're talking about, people who feel disenfranchised, they feel that their country is no longer theirs, that they have been thrown on the scrap heap, whether it's economically or socially, because of political correctness or cultural Marxism or identity politics. All these things are alien to the experience of most people. And so they just vote by tearing it all up because they think it's so wrecked, we might as well go in with the battering ram.
Yeah, I think it's alien, particularly in our country where we've had such a wonderful ethos of a fair go, treat people as we find them on merit. And I really worry young men are feeling resentful about the left feminist agenda. And when you get resentment in a political system, it's never healthy, it never ends well. Resentment is the enemy of community, of trust, of social capital, of what people on my side of politics used to call the good society. I just think this is the biggest own goal and disaster you'll ever see.
But why has Labor, Labor has embraced identity politics. I mean, the Liberals have been gutless and they haven't fought against it. But Labor has actually gone and joined with the Greens in embracing it and using it to divvy up the electorate and have people pitted against each other. What is their purpose? It's
very divisive. I think the problem has been for Labor is that the leftist impulse is to do things through the state to remould society. And you look at the recent history of the left, they've had so many setbacks, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Leftist foreign policy fell apart. The whole model of economic planning is no longer relevant. Keating deregulated the economy in the 80s, and we've had a long period of growth. The really big turning point, I reckon it was the historic failure of the Rudd-Gillard refugee policy. That here was an instance where people like Carmen Lawrence and others on the left inside the Labor caucus when I was there were saying open borders, and the identity was these are all oppressed people. They might be paying people smugglers to get on the boats, but they're all oppressed people. They must come in. It was a movement towards the global trade in people, the global movement of people, and it gave those leftists a sense of doing something through government that they thought was right. And I remember standing up in Labor faction and sub-faction meetings, caucus meetings. Laurie Ferguson was doing the same on the left and saying if you base any policy, let alone immigration policy, around illegality, that is people paying people smugglers, it won't end well. You're basing this on illegality, and of course part of the illegality was they're paying for leaky boats and the boats sank and more than 1,200 people drowned. So all this pious talk about helping asylum seekers in need, they ended up killing them effectively. And you know, blind Freddie could tell that the boats were unseaworthy and they'd sink in the waters between Australia and Indonesia. So the left were routed at that point, absolutely fundamentally marginalised as a political force. They'd said they were going to help these people, and the people died. It doesn't get any worse than that in politics. Does not get it. How the likes of Albanese and Plibersek and all those mounting these arguments in the inner city electorates can sleep at night, I just do not know. But it doesn't get any worse than trying to help people and they end up dying.
They've never acknowledged it. They've never apologised.
They haven't. But they've moved on from that historic failure to then embrace identity politics, race, gender and sexuality. It's their new project, if you like. So it's a historic failure on so many fronts. Really, for them, identity politics is the last drink saloon. You know, the last thing they can do, and it's worse than anything they've ever done in the past, you know.
Because it makes them look virtuous, is that why?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the impression of caring. You know, the feminists can say we care about women becoming judges and politicians, so it's virtue impressions, and it's selfish. It's mainly about them.
See, when I was heavily involved in government committees and so on, was in your era when you were leader of opposition, and Howard was in, and Howard was speaking out about men and about men's rights and about dads and about, you know, remember there was a fuss about whether single women should have access to IVF, and Howard actually said, well, it had started a whole debate about whether it's important for children to have a mother and a father. I mean, he was incredibly brave. He was really interested in family law issues, and in fact introduced a whole series of reforms of the Family Law Act to enable children to have some sort of contact with their dads. I mean, to have a presumption that children should have contact with both parents after divorce. And I was on a lot of committees, and it was very obvious that a lot of the resistance was coming from Labor, which I had always felt was absolutely captured at that stage by the feminist lobby, by the lone parent groups.
They've been totally overrun by identity politics, shortly.
Even then, that was a long time ago.
And I think one of the main problems, they do not know the harm they're doing to society. You look at the refugee debate, in the centre of Sydney, local government areas like Leichhardt, Marrickville, Woollahra, Mossman, North Sydney might take 5-10 refugees a year. They really don't know these asylum seekers. A place like Fairfield in Western Sydney, 4,000 per annum, including the great bulk of the special Syrian intake established by Tony Abbott. So in the communities that settle the refugees, the talk is very different. It's very much an abstract debate for all the people who get their little candles in Federation Square, Melbourne, or Hyde Park in Sydney. They've got their little candlelit suburbs, but they've got no asylum seekers coming in. And it's an abstract debate, and they don't understand these issues, that the good society is founded on people getting to know each other, coming together, not judging each other by race, gender and sexuality, but judging each other as Australians and working together in that common bond of nationhood. So they don't know the damage they're causing, and just as the oppression of free speech by the left is a total disaster and they'll live to regret it, identity politics, there comes the point, it may be running through Australian institutions, and that's tragic, but there comes the point that just like the refugee policy, this thing will fall apart will end up a shambles, and they'll be ruining the day.
But we will,
and future generations.
And unfortunately, the Liberal Party does not fight
Why
against
have they folded? They're part of it now.
Well, they are, and they, I mean, it's Safe Schools is a perfect example. This supposed anti-bullying program that's going into schools, that supposedly that really is just a sort of extreme sex education program, teaching children that sexuality and gender is fluid, not fixed. It's really very radical, and it's deliberately designed by Marxist gender academics at La Trobe University, but specifically to bypass parents. It was designed so that parents were not allowed to have a say and decide whether or not their children could talk. Now, this has been instituted by Liberal governments, federally and also state Liberal education ministers. And it's winding up in July, the federal funding, so we are hoping perhaps in New South Wales it will die, although we haven't got a specific answer on that, surprisingly enough, from the New South Wales Liberal Education Minister Rob Stokes. But we know in Victoria, the socialist Daniel Andrews government has embraced Safe Schools, has given it more money and has expanded it, and has resisted even the small tinkering with it that the Turnbull government made, which was to ensure that parents gave permission beforehand, and a couple of other little tinkerings, but they've even resisted that. So this is a program that does not stop bullying. It's specifically about imposing an extreme sexual agenda on children.
It is, but it's not just Safe Schools. I mean, where's the Turnbull government abolishing these safe spaces, segregationist safe spaces in universities? Where's the Turnbull government standing up against the employment policy Martin Parkinson's introduced in the public service to say unconscious bias, these voices in his head are forcing him to say, I've lost all judgment here, and we've got to employ people not on merit but on how they look, a primitive doctrine of how they look. Where's the Turnbull government abolishing the Human Rights Commission with this Gillian Trigg saying that sadly people can say whatever they like around the kitchen table? Where Tim Soutphommasane is introducing racial quotas. I mean, the arrogance of someone who says, 10% of the general population is Asian, therefore the top legal firms have got to have 10% Asian lawyers. What if the Asians don't want to be lawyers? Right. The Asian families I know, fantastic, working hard in schools, running great businesses, by and large for their children, want them to be doctors, scientists, engineers and mathematicians, and they've got a wonderful aptitude in maths. So who is this racial god starting to mould society to basically say to other Asians, oh, you must be a lawyer, when they might not want that?
As you wrote, you look at Sydney Boys High or
North Sydney, Hurlston, James Roos, the very best.
Yeah, so if you're going to impose a representative target of diversity to represent the outside, you would have to sack half the Asians.
What Miranda's saying for our interstate viewers outside of New South Wales, there's a selective school system, and the very top school, in fact, James Roos in the northwest sector of Sydney is the top school in the whole country. It's 90% Asian. Selective, you get in there on merit, you study hard, you do well in the selective test in year 6. And a whole raft of other schools in Sydney, 90% Asian. Now, I say good on you for working so effectively and getting that education. But if we're going to have racial quotas, it opens up the Hansonite argument. Hang on, we're going to have racial quotas, equal representation in all the important institutions, and there's none more important than a selective school. Soutphommasane went to one, Hurlston, my old school, you should know this, that if you're going to have a policy of 10% general population Asian, 10% in the institutions, these schools are 90% Asian. You have to kick 80% of the Asian students out to meet this madman's racial quota. It's an own goal. It's a disaster. And the Hansonites will get onto this, and again, it's very divisive. Instead of just going through the standard process of judging people on merit. If Asians are 90% of the selective schools on merit, good on you. If they're 5% of the legal fraternity because they prefer other professions, and I think they've got 20% of doctors in Australia, good on them for that, and good on them in a free society for making a choice. Who is this dictator?
It's the same for women. I mean, who is it to say that women want to be CEOs or want to be, at the top of the pops in the capitalist system? Maybe they don't. Maybe there are other things that women want to do, like nursing or whatever.
Or taking time out to look after their children.
Exactly.
Coming on Mark Latham's Outsiders. I'm so lucky to have two effective, articulate, intelligent, well-researched women on our show. You're watching it on live Facebook streaming, this wonderful new technology that allows us to give you free speech on free TV, no pesky ads annoying and interrupting. Hope you're enjoying the conversation. We're going to also try and toss in a few viewer questions or queries for the panel. We've got about 15 minutes to go. This is our first show. It's fantastic the support you're giving to Mark Latham's Outsiders, and of course it's not easy. There's financial issues, risks involved. We've got a support page that we've established, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. If you're able to help us along the way, if you're enjoying the program, you think this is important, the viability of this show is important for free speech, openness, evidence-based discussion, the sort of things you don't hear in the mainstream media, please go to that page, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. Any contribution helps. It is a battle. I'm not going to go over what happened last week. Some people say go through that. I'm not going to go through that. People know the story. They know the sort of environment we've got in this country. The media, the institutions, whether you're trying to show a movie or you're trying to get into a play group, it's not an easy environment in Australia at the moment. If you can support us, it'd be fantastic, and we're going to keep airing these issues as best we can, honestly, openly, and in the great Australian tradition. Now, talking of impressive women, Arndt Hirsi-Ali. Devastating news that this very effective spokesperson, again learning about Islam, she had that background, I think she grew up in Somalia, a victim of genital mutilation, an international scholar, author. I think you've met her, haven't you,
I have,
Miranda?
a couple of times.
Yeah. I haven't. I haven't had the privilege of that.
She travels everywhere with a 24-hour armed guard because
can
her life...
you tell us what's happened just in the last couple of days with Arndt Hirsi-Ali?
Well, she was to come out and do a speaking tour around Australia, and she's had to pull out in part on security grounds, and there was just an enormous groundswell from sort of Muslim women groups and some group that calls itself, Australians Against Islamophobia, and they all attacked her ruthlessly before she arrived and decided that they were, just as the red pill was no platformed, they started attacking the insurers of venues that were going to host Arndt Hirsi-Ali. In the end, she had to pull out just a couple of days before she was going to come. So it is a victory again for the bullies, the totalitarian bullies, who do not want to hear anybody who disagrees with what they think.
And there's the evidence.
You know what's amazing about her? I went to Writers' Festivals a few years ago when she'd published her book Infidel, and there was just massive audience, all adoring her. She was the darling of the left, because here was this brave woman who'd escaped from this tyranny of these...
And she ticks all the boxes because she's female, she's black, and she's Muslim.
And she was being bullied ferociously by, the arranged marriage, as was what she was escaping from, and so on. I mean, she was an absolute hero for those women.
Because she calls for the reform of Islam. That's her core message.
That's what she does now, and she talks. She doesn't attack Muslims. What she says is that there's two strands of Islam, the Mecca and Medina strand, and she says that one is determined to evangelize and turn everybody else into a Muslim, and the other is more laid back and will allow other religions and other faiths to exist.
So fundamentalism versus moderate, tolerant.
Yeah, and she went to Holland. I mean, she goes to Holland and is shocked to see what's happening in Holland in terms of immigrants from the various Islamic countries. I mean, this diversity argument that they were being encouraged to practice their traditional beliefs. They were being, there was very little attempt to try to encourage them to assimilate. I mean, that was what she wrote about at that time. And a lot of people absolutely thought this made a lot of sense. That was embraced. She talked about that in these writers' conferences. All that's gone out the window. I mean, it just shows how much has changed in the last, 5 years or so.
And back in Holland, she was a politician, and a friend of hers who was a filmmaker, Theo van Gogh, was making a film about Islam, and he was murdered by a mad Islamist who tried to behead him and pinned a note, some Quranic scripture on his chest. And from that moment on, Arndt Hirsi-Ali's life, she's had like Salman Rushdie, she's had a price on her head.
Well, she's an incredibly brave woman to put up with this intimidation and plough on with her message.
And it's humiliating for Australia.
I would have thought the argument about reform of Islam is fundamental to the future of our civilisation, because we know the problem with the radical Islam, and it sounds like they've had a victory in stopping her from coming in
They have.
to Australia. But the argument really is to say that to rely on a holy book that is ancient in any religion, you can find some fundamentalist aspects. So the challenge for all religions is to modernise and come in touch with modern Western civilised values. So it really is a compelling argument, and if more people listen to Ayaan Hirsi Ali and adopted that approach with Islam, then the world would be a safer and more harmonious place, wouldn't it?
Well, and the point is, you're not going to learn anything, and you're not going to evolve and progress as a society if you just shut down and ban people whose ideas are different from your own. And if we allow these bullies to stop other people from talking, who might challenge our thinking, and that sort of free speech which allows us all to understand what the world is all about, if we allow one small group of people to control what we hear, then we're heading down a really totalitarian Orwellian.
A lot of Australians have missed the opportunity to listen to her and learn from her. Again, judging evidence and her experience in life, which is quite amazing, such an accomplished international author and scholar. I think Malcolm Turnbull, my opinion, Malcolm Turnbull should have picked up the phone and said, Ayaan, I'm embarrassed as the leader of Australia that you're not able to come to our country safely with a mature, sensible message. People don't necessarily have to agree with you, but we want to hear what you've got to say. You're a person who's well regarded in the international community. He should have said, as Prime Minister of Australia, I will deploy the resources of the Australian Federal Police and the military experts to secure these venues, to ensure they're safe, put all the technology and the sniffer dogs through, cordon them off a perimeter. We did this for the international leaders at APEC at Brisbane, for Barack Obama to sort of tell us we're a pack of ning-nongs on a certain issue. So we cordoned it off. Brisbane was closed down so people could sort of say Australia doesn't get it, these international elites. She should have been welcomed by the Australian Prime Minister who said, I'm using the resources of our country. We're not going to be embarrassed by this internationally. I'm going to secure these venues, and you've got to guarantee, as best I can provide it, that it's safe to exercise your free speech.
You should be advising Malcolm Turnbull.
I mean, isn't it just weakness to basically say, I'm giving in to the censorship mob, I'm giving in to the intimidators,
Malcolm Turnbull gives in to anyone.
I'm giving in to radical Islam here. This is a fight.
This is a fight on any issue.
But what Liberal does, they're all gutless. This is the problem with the modern Liberal Party, is that there is an enormous grassroots constituency for the Liberal Party if only somebody had guts in that party, and I can see very few MPs, and part of that is the sort of toxic control that a few lobbyists have over who gets pre-selected, the actual politicians who end up in the party. So you've got two mainstream parties, and 40% of Australians don't want anything to do with them, and that's terribly destructive for the country.
This is an important point. The outsider revolt is not just against the Greens and Labor, it's against the ineffectiveness of the Liberal Party to protect and preserve institutions that matter, isn't it? I mean, this is a big part of the mood.
I mean, if anybody should have stood up against safe schools, it was the Liberal Party. If anybody...
defending family.
And yet we are also seeing, for instance, in the army, now the diversity warriors, the David Morrison, the former Chief of Army, who then became Australian of the Year, created a disaster in the army by bringing in this Liz Broderick and totally emasculating the army, and saying that the Anglo-Saxon warrior ethos had to be stamped out, that there was something wrong with it. And so now, if you're a woman in the army, you have 3 times as much chance of being promoted than a man. Now this is something that is so corrosive. It's right across the ADF, and you have Marise Payne, who's the first female defence minister. She's all rah-rah.
That's all she does of a day.
That's right, and Malcolm Turnbull thinks it's wonderful. Now they are going to demoralise, they already have demoralised our armed forces. God forbid if we need an actual war, and all the warlike people, all the warriors who seem to be persona non grata in the army have gone. Yeah,
these doctrines have run through institutions. I don't think there's an understanding, or we haven't heard enough about the extent to which this has gone through institutions, through higher education, the ABC, SBS.
Well, look at
Human Rights Commission, schools,
we've got little boys,
the public service. You've got
the white ribbon campaign,
Thomasan with racial quotas.
Media.
The federal police, the media, of course, and even in the defence force. I was talking to a fellow on the phone today around lunchtime who's had 30 years' experience in Australian politics, just retired. He was an official of a major political party. He said to me, Mark, what sort of fight are we fighting? And I said, mate, I think we need to understand this is a rearguard action. The forces that are running this mutant virus through our institutions have got about 70% control. Well, it's not over yet. This is the rearguard, but I think anyone who thinks we're the sensible people are still the majority in the institutions. I think we've got the majority of the Australian people, but the institutions are 70% with the PC madness. So I said it's a rearguard action. We're having to circle the wagons here to defend the Australian way of life.
I get letters every day from people saying, I wouldn't dare say what you say about domestic violence, about all the issues I write about. And people have been cowered into shutting up about any number of issues we've been talking about tonight. And that's disgraceful. And it's particularly disgraceful in academia, which should be all about promoting, the right of people to exchange disparate views.
Of course, it's how you learn and become a better person.
But it's gone, as you say, it's gone right through to the schooling system.
Well, it's one of the reasons we're here, aren't we?
We've got a big job ahead of us.
That's one of the reasons we're here tonight. But we're enjoying it. Hopefully our viewers are enjoying Mark Latham's Outsiders' first ever live Facebook streaming. Now, we'll have a little technical interlude as Betty, our wonderful producer, tells us a question that's been put by one of our Facebook viewers.
Hansi wanted to know if the gender wage gap is real.
Hansi.
I think it's a big topic, but essentially the figures on the gender wage gap are totally concocted. If you look carefully and dissect the gap, it's very much about working hours of men and women. It's very much about commitment to years of work without taking time off. Of course, women choose to take time off to look after their children.
Despite the best efforts of safe schools, still only women can have children.
It's about the whole argument about whether women at their first job are willing to ask for as much money as the men do. There's really interesting research showing how much influence that has.
There's no doubt
they don't promote themselves, they don't push. Women who do promote themselves get treated differently, but so we tend to cave in. But it's a lot more than just discrimination going on.
Yeah, Hansi, I looked at some of these stats.
I think we should look at that issue carefully one day.
I had a debate with the dreadful Van Badham on 7 Sunrise. We love Sunrise, but we don't love Van. And she put forward fake figures, and I went and looked up all the research, and it showed that if you factor out the labour market consideration that women have children and leave the workforce or work part-time and all those factors. So you look at a controlled group, university graduates going on to their first job. The truth is, amazingly in Australia, according, if you listen to the left feminists, it's an amazing stat, that the majority of professional groups, for newly employed graduates, the female remuneration is higher than men. A majority. So, we do have legislated wage equality in Australia, and it's reflected in that post-university cohort. So, Hansi, hopefully that answers your question. Maybe we've got time for one more.
The comments are coming in so fast, it's hard to catch them all. I missed the name on this one, but someone asked, is the gap between Labor and Liberal closing?
Miranda?
The gap between Labor and Liberal, well, I guess they're both equally reprehensible in terms of the fact that they are missing the sort of the culture wars. The Liberal Party is deliberately, you look at some of the most promising Liberal MPs, and they seem to think that they can just be technocrats. They can just be good at fixing the economy. Well, they're not that good at fixing the economy. You might forgive them something if they were doing that, but they're not. So they think they can be technocrats, keep their hands clean, not be attacked by anybody as a bigot or a, Islamophobe or a homophobe or a xenophobe, and all these criticisms that they're given if they wade into the culture wars, exactly what we're talking about tonight and what your program will be about, and which is what motivates and activates most Australians, because the culture wars are the vehicle for changing our society, and it's the sort of political correctness and so on. They are really weapons. They are weapons of totalitarianism. They effectively silence people, and they allow certain groups to take power.
Yeah, I'll just give you my theory. I watched in the 80s and 90s how Labor was overrun by machine politics, the apparatchik, the factions, also self-serving, just after power, inside the party and, of course, in government. And really what happens with the machine politician is that the interest groups knock on the door and say, you know, accommodate my identity, politics, my interest group agenda, and we'll give you some votes at election time. And Labor caved into this stuff. You know, first the ethnic groups came, branch stacking and the like. Then the left feminists came, and then we're sort of into the sexuality groups now, and we're sort of down to a couple of transgender people knocking on the door, and all that. But the instinct of the machine politician is to cave in. So Labor went through that in the 80s and 90s. I won't name who's responsible, but I think the public knows the agenda there. And I think the same process has happened to the Liberal Party, particularly in New South Wales. Everyone talks about this Michael Photios, who apparently doesn't believe in a lot, but if you knock on his door, you've got a bunch of interest group votes, he'll say, where do I sign up? Where do I change Liberal policy? And this is why I think, having been overtaken by machine politics, the New South Wales Liberals in particular, not so much in Victoria, but possibly in other states, it's hard to tell the difference with Labor because they've caved into the same interest groups who came on a knocking.
It's the same factional poison, and I think the reason perhaps Victoria is a little less susceptible to it is because they had some reform in their structures where they allowed what's called a plebiscite, but anyway, it's a more democracy in choosing who their MPs are. Unfortunately, in New South Wales, it's controlled really by a couple of lobbyists. You named Michael Photios, and he wields enormous power.
They say he runs everything, choosing everything.
And on Saturday, we're going to see two by-elections in New South Wales. Both of those candidates were nowhere near the best candidates who would put themselves up for pre-selection. There were some really excellent people, selfless, community-minded people who were embedded in their local communities. They were not chosen. Instead, these factional Daleks were chosen, and this is just poison to the Liberal Party.
Well, we're starting to run up against time, but hopefully the viewers will stay with us, because I did promise I would ask Bettina, online dating coach, this wonderful essay you've written in The Spectator Australia, edited by the great Rowan Dean. I just want to read out a little quote. It's a fascinating experience. The power of market forces, even when it comes to a bit of the old hanky-panky. This is you in The Spectator Australia. A randy young man can spend all day chasing hot chicks, but unless he's also a catch, I mean, you know, he's a bit hot, he'll just end up with a sore finger. Tinder forces young people to come to terms with their market value.
There you go. Learning
to approach suitors in their ballpark rather than just drooling at unobtainable options. So isn't that a wonderful statement of the power of the market, even when it comes to a bit of the old, what is referred to in the title, dancing under the doona. Doona dancing.
Under the dancing doona.
Under the dancing doona. So how does it work? How does it work, Tom?
I had the dancing doona in my online dating profile, and it did me a power of good.
I saw that. We're not going to have too much sex on this show too early. I saw that, but let's just stick to the randy young man.
It's a really interesting thing. Of course, people have a very inflated view of their market value very often, particularly some of the women, and who, you know, just the more men they have in their lives over a long history, the more they add to their shopping list of what they need and what they want, and convincing them that they won't get that whole list, and they have to think very carefully about who they're most likely to attract and what do they have to offer that man is a big task.
So don't go punching too far above your weight. You know, that's your ambitions.
I mean, a lot of, you know, the men who think they can attract young
fascinating.
women.
I often say at home, and I suppose it's a factor, isn't it, that if you're happily married and a stable family life, you don't know how lucky you are watching shows like Married at First Sight. And I don't know if anyone watches that Real Housewives of Sydney. Wow! Oh, yeah, I mean, if you're out there sort of in the market trying to find a partner, it's a lot better to be settled.
Horrific.
There's still, I know it's unfashionable.
It's wonderful. I mean,
it's wonderful.
It is wonderful. I mean, it is an extraordinary thing. We have these huge pools of single people, and we have the means of bringing them together, which is the internet.
I know young women who complain. They say, for instance, they go out to a pub, and where it used to be that there'd be a table full of young men, a table full of young women, and the men would have to approach the women, and sometimes they'd be knocked back, and they'd have to, you know, gird their loins and be brave. Now, both tables are just busy on Tinder swiping, so the men don't have to put themselves out there.
Which is good for those men, believe me.
No, but that's a right of
What are you
passage.
saying, Miranda? It's a bit more impersonal.
For me.
Yeah, but men don't have to put themselves out there.
Approaching
They don't have
strangers,
to start their lives being endlessly rejected, which is what used to happen to like.
But it's important that
I
they
did
suffer
all right.
that rejection.
I
It's good for them.
No, it's not good.
Luckiest
for them.
man in the country, I think.
I think it's really good for men and women because this dating process means they both have to put themselves out there. They both have to approach each other, and if the women aren't in it, making advances to men,
it's so brutally transactional,
No,
and it's all
no,
about
no.
the image.
No. It works really well. I'm a product of a very successful online dating match, so there you are.
Well, there you go, viewers. There's a bit of disagreement at Mark Latham's outside. Ooh, you won't see that on the ABC drum. Ooh, disagreement. You won't see that down at Fairfax, The Guardian, or Huffington Post. People with different points of view. Look, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Miranda, how have you found it? A whole new experience. This may well be, well, we hope, the most substantial audience for this new technology, Australian politics.
This has been the most relaxed panel show I've done, and I have to take my hat off to you, Mark. Good on you. It's only been a week since Sky gave you the boot, and already look at this fantastic set. Comments coming in left, right, and centre.
Will you come back?
100,000. I'd love to come back sometime.
Hasn't been too painful?
Not too
the
bad.
Dreadful misogynist Mark Latham hasn't done anything dreadful.
It's been okay. So far, so good.
Okay, thank you for your participation.
Pleasure.
I love your stuff. I mean, you write material that literally comes off the street, like the story you had about the playgroup, and it just informs people of things that are going on that other journalists are too scared to touch.
Thank you.
And you cop a lot of flack and abuse from all the normal intimidators and censors, and you stand up to it, and hats off to you for the work you do, particularly as a mother worrying about the future of young men. I just find that so compelling. To worry about others, of course, is the true nature of compassion. So good on you. And Tina, you've been fantastic.
Thank you.
All this evidence you've got. I want to hear more about the men's conference on the Gold Coast.
We
I think
haven't
it's
talked
such an
about
important
domestic
issue.
violence.
No, we have. Well, I mean, we've gone over time by about 6 or 7
You've been
minutes.
a warrior in the area.
Well, I copped it. I copped it for, my great sin, of course, is to read government research reports and then tell the public what's in them. I know it's not fashionable. It's like the nuclear family. It's like being happily married. Not fashionable. But we do it here on Mark Latham's Outsiders. Look, I really value the support I've had. Miranda mentioned the past week. I'm not going to go into that. Everyone knows the score. The thing, of course, is to talk about the issues that matter for the country's future. We're not here for self-glorification. We're here to talk about things that matter for our children, our grandchildren, and Australia's future. So much to talk about. Other issues that we'll address next week. Hopefully you'll come back, Bettina and Miranda. I think we've done pretty well tonight. Hopefully you've enjoyed us. And we'll be back next Wednesday. And, of course, just that site again, support.marklathamsoutsiders.com. Go to our Facebook page, a website coming up. Thank you so much. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. And we've loved talking about these issues. And we'll be back next time, same time on a Wednesday next week, 8 to 9 p.m. Thanks very much for your support. God love you.